Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
News coming from Ukraine. And everybody needs to know about this, because the developments that are happening in Ukraine influence absolutely everybody in the world. Not just the Ukrainians, not just the Eastern Europeans, not just the Europeans, but the whole world. As we all well know, Russia is weaponizing grain. Russia is weaponizing gas and fuel and oil. Russia is weaponizing everything they have at their disposal, even the very ethnicity of their own people. And they make it as an excuse to invade other countries that have a Russian minority. They have done this in Georgia. They have done this in Ukraine in 2014. They have done this again almost 2 years ago in this latest escalation of this war. This has to stop. We cannot allow such behavior to continue. We cannot allow the country with the most nuclear weapons in the world to behave this way and to have this kind of terrorist government. If Russia felt like it could get away with using nuclear weapons, it would have used them already. But Russia is still afraid of some consequences to their actions. And we must make sure that they know that any further escalation from their side will result in those consequences, so that they stop this senseless war that they have started, that the Russian terrorist regime has started for their personal benefits, the personal benefits of their elites. Even Prigozhin himself said that this war was never fought for liberation. This war was never fought to defend any minority. This war was fought for one reason only: to enrich the Russian elites. That is exactly what they've been trying to do ever since the beginning of this terrible war. And the only way to stop this war, as we all well know, is to help Ukraine win. Stop Russia, stop the war!
Stop Russia! Stop the war!
Stop Russia, stop the war!
Stop Russia! Stop the war!
Help Ukraine protect peace!
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 More sanctions on Russia!
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 And sanctions have had their effect. In fact, the ruble is declining in its worth right now. It is an old video, but I encourage everybody to watch it, where Putin long ago is saying, a while ago the ruble, or rather $1, was 30 rubles. Now it's 40. So we're actually getting richer, because we are getting, instead of 30 rubles worth of goods, 40 rubles worth of goods. That is ridiculous, my friends. Nobody in their right mind would believe in such a thing. It was 100 rubles to the greenback the other day, and now it is 100 rubles, which is the next part of this conversation. You know, the ruble has been going down lately, unlike what Putin has been saying, because Putin has been claiming that Russia has had some economic miracle when resisting the sanctions imposed on them. Russia has not been resisting them. Russia has been postponing the consequences of these sanctions with economic control of their country, just like they had done during the Soviet Union. Complete economic control.
I'm sorry to bring my ears.
We don't want to go back into the past. We don't want to go back into the genocidal and authoritarian Soviet Union, equal to Nazi Germany, in the people that they have exterminated and in their atrocities committed. But Putin, on the other hand, he claims that the collapse of the Soviet Union has been the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. Imagine, would that be a good look if the current German Chancellor was glorifying Nazi Germany? No, it wouldn't. Why is it that so many people are perfectly fine with Putin glorifying the terrible Soviet Union? Why is it that every Eastern European country is terrified of Russia and wanted to join NATO as soon as possible? Because they knew what Russia could do. They knew that the Russian terrorist state has no scruples, and so they joined NATO for their safety. And we, my friends, the Ukrainians also wanted to join NATO for their own safety. But unfortunately, certain voices have been too loud, and some people have been dragging their feet. Some people have been claiming their support for Russia. And that is not allowed, my friends. We cannot keep having these silly ideas that we can negotiate with Russia with appeasement tactics. That if only we give a little bit more to Russia, they will stop. No. That has been disproven again and again and again. There had been appeasement tactics implemented with Russia when they invaded Georgia. Has it worked? No. There had been appeasement tactics implemented at the beginning of the war of Ukraine all the way back in 2014. Have they worked? No. Why would we try to implement the same exact policies, the same exact tactics of appeasement and of giving Putin whatever he wants, if such things have not worked in the past? If such things only appease him for a short amount of time, perhaps a year or two, until he rebuilds, regroups, and goes for his next insane expedition into a country that does not want to be held hostage by the Russian gas or by the Russian military. Why should Ukraine listen to what Russia wants Ukraine to do? Why is it that some people, some Russophiles, claim that we should consult with Russia whether Ukraine joins NATO or not? Why should we ask Russia for what a sovereign country like Ukraine does? This is a terrible precedent, my friends. Ukraine has achieved its independence long ago. And the only way to show the whole world that it is not just hot air, that the independence of a country is worth something, that the treaties that a country makes are worth something, is to help Ukraine defend itself against this unprovoked and unjustifiable Russian invasion. We need to understand what we're dealing with now, my friends. After the failed coup attempt, Prigozhin has sent a lot of the Wagnerites to Belarus. And now, they are threatening the Polish with an invasion. They are threatening to attack Poland next. They say jokingly that they might go on a little excursion or on a little field trip to Poland. Yes, indeed. Just like they had a little field trip into Ukraine with all kinds of atrocities, too many to count. We must not forget what they have done in the past. We must not forget the behavior of the Russians in Syria, where they used chemical weapons, where they leveled Aleppo with their artillery and shells. We must not forget how Russia is destabilizing many countries in sub-Saharan Africa right now. The war in Sudan has the hand of Russia all over it, because the Wagner Group supports the side that is destabilizing Sudan. Mali, Burkina Faso, and lately Niger are other countries where Russia is destabilizing them, where Russia is trying their best to create dissent, to create war and suffering, so that they can steal as much as humanly possible from those countries also. The Wagner Group owns a lot of gold mines in Sudan right now, which is part of the money that the Russians are getting to finance their war. This is their source of revenue, neo-colonialism. This is what the Russian terrorist regime does, and this is what they will continue to do even more in the future, unless their actions are put to a stop. But how do we do it? How do we come to a consensus with a country, with a terrorist regime that refuses any kind of concessions? How can we negotiate with them?
You don't.
It is very simple, my friends. We need to help the Ukrainians win on the battlefield in Ukraine. We need to help them beat back the Russian military. And then, and only then, will the Russian terrorist regime realize that they cannot simply bang their fist on the table and demand whatever they please. The world doesn't work like that anymore. They are used to doing such things to the countries around them, in Kazakhstan, in Belarus, and Ukraine, of course. But now it has to stop, once and for all. Let's not forget that Putin has used the same kind of rhetoric he has used against the Ukrainian people, against Kazakhstan, against Belarus, and against even Poland. Exactly the same thing that Putin has said about Ukraine, he has said about many other countries. And that is why Kazakhstan now is slowly starting to switch sides. Because they realize that the Russians don't respect them. They don't respect their history. They don't respect their right of self-governance, their rights of sovereignty. There is no such thing in Russia as sovereignty. There is only might makes right. My friends, we aim to live in a better world. In a world where somebody will not abuse others just because he's stronger. That is not a good world to live in. It should be a meritocracy, not an autocracy. It should be the best and brightest at the top, not the strongest at the top. Because then we get a country-sized criminal syndicate like Russia that has the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, demanding whatever they please of the rest of the world, holding the world at ransom with grain, with oil, and with the nuclear weapons. We must not allow such situations to happen again and again. Because if Russia gets what they want in Ukraine, then similar wars are inevitable. Taiwan will be next on the block. The Chinese will be emboldened to attack Taiwan if they see that the West does nothing to help Ukraine, or rather, doesn't do enough to help Ukraine. Let's not forget that the biggest nuclear demilitarization in human history has been done by the Ukrainian people. They are the nation that has sacrificed the most to achieve world peace. Period. They have sacrificed their nuclear weapons. They have sacrificed the ability to destroy the whole world in exchange of a promise of peace and trade and friendship. Speaking of which, the friendship treaty between Ukraine and Russia has also been signed, where the Russians once again committed themselves to the same treaties that they had in the past, in the Budapest Memorandum. The Russians have broken all of those treaties. They invaded Ukraine when Ukraine was the weakest, when Ukraine did not have any more nuclear weapons, when Ukraine's military was not strong, was not organized. And we are expected to believe the conversations of the Russophiles who claim that if we just demilitarize Ukraine, the war will stop. How would that ever make sense for any person, for any sane person, any thinking and reasonable person? How would that make any sense? The Russians have invaded Ukraine when it was weak, not when it was strong. Russians will invade Ukraine again and again and again until there is no more Ukraine. It is as the saying has been popularized: if Russia stops fighting, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends. And we must not forget about this. There is another saying that has been said many times by our president. It is that radiation knows no borders. And if the Russians are allowed to believe that the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine will not be punished, they will use those nuclear weapons. Appeasement tactics will not prevent them from using them. It is the inevitable and immediate threat of retaliation that will prevent them from using those weapons. It is what has always prevented them from using those weapons. And if anybody thinks that if we just try to speak with Russia again, we will solve this situation, they are terribly mistaken. We need to live in the real world, not in an imaginary world, not in the world we would like to live in. We can't simply put in our minds that if we just speak with everybody, they will all make up their mind. No. There are some countries that are terrorist countries. There are some people who are psychopaths. And we need to have the ability to defend ourselves against such individuals, to defend our countries against such terrorist regimes. Arms keep peace. It is an ancient saying, and it holds true even now. And we must not forget about it. We must not forget, and we must help Ukraine win. All together, we will win.
All together, we will win. All together, we will win.
Fighter jets for Ukraine.
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 Air defense 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 for Ukraine.
Russia has been selling a lot of their oil to China and India, but at reduced prices. They're not getting much out of it. But what we must be careful with is trading with Russia excessively. This is the reason why the West has not completely stopped any kind of oil from flowing out of Russia. They don't want the oil prices to rise and make life unbearable for the rest of the world. Nobody wants that. We are negotiating with the rest of the world about the safety of Ukraine. Just because the Ukrainian people do not want misery to take over the world, but the Russian terrorist regime and their propaganda shills are openly saying that they want to cause a famine in Africa. They want to cause destabilization in the finances of the rest of the world. They want to cause chaos, destruction, disorder, and death in the whole world, so that the world stops looking at Ukraine and starts looking at all the other disasters that the Russian terrorist regime is trying to create. But we must not forget that if we stop Russia in Ukraine, they will not have the power to destabilize the world elsewhere. Ukraine needs long-range missiles. Ukraine needs all the best military equipment the West has to offer. That is the only way that the Ukrainians are going to be able to win this war, to beat back the terrorist army of Russia, and to finally achieve peace. That is the only way that we are going to get out of this terrible situation in which Putin has put the whole world in. And Putin is betting on people losing hope in Ukraine. Putin is betting on people forgetting about their promises in the past. He's betting on it, and he will lose as long as every single person in the world knows what's going on, and every single person makes the right decision. Everybody should know so that people can make an informed decision about this matter. And this matter is incredibly important. Because why should any country in the world reduce their nuclear arsenal if Ukraine, right after giving up its nuclear arsenal, gets invaded by the top nuclear power in the world? Why should everybody choose demilitarization? Why should everybody trust in peace for the future if Ukraine is allowed to go down? Just because people don't want to provoke Russia. Ukraine has given up its nuclear weapons. Ukraine has trusted the world. Ukraine has trusted the West. Now it is time to show that that trust was deserved. It is time to show to the whole world that nuclear demilitarization is possible. And its consequences will not always be negative. In fact, if we help Ukraine win, then perhaps more countries could follow suit and could demilitarize their nuclear weapons. We have spoken many times with the "not our war" and "stop the war" hypocrites, our opposition. Unfortunately, our opposition cannot elaborate a proper argument, so all of our conversations have been cut short. But there have been some topics that we have covered extensively. For example, the fact that the Stop the War people have a nuclear weapon behind a forbidden sign on their posters. And I have asked them, do you guys know about the biggest nuclear demilitarization in the world? They said no. I asked them, are you guys not promoting nuclear demilitarization? Are you not trying to make it so that less countries have nuclear weapons? Are you not trying to reduce the risk of nuclear war? They said, yes, we are. Well then, how do you not know about the biggest nuclear demilitarization in human history? It has been done by Ukraine, and they had no idea about it. They were saying that the Ukrainians were provoking Russia. They were saying that the West was provoking Russia, that the West was planning to put nukes in Ukraine. Well, my friends, why did Ukraine give up the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world just to put more nuclear weapons instead? It makes no sense. Even a blind man can see it. It is obviously propaganda and nonsense. It was the Russians who started this war. It was the Russians who have escalated this war. And this war will only end by defeating Russia in Ukraine. That is the only way to achieve peace. That is the only way to have a better future. That is the only way to prevent more wars from breaking out, not only in Ukraine, not only in Europe, but in the rest of the world too. And keep in mind that Russia has laid the groundwork to start new wars in many countries all over the world already. As we've covered before, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Syria, also in Moldova, where the region of Transnistria still has around 10,000 Russian troops. Russian troops that were never allowed to stay there. Russian troops that exist in a country that has not been recognized by anybody except Russia and their crooks. How can we deal with such a country? It's impossible. They are claiming they are there for peace, and they are sharpening their knife and getting ready for a backstab. They have done it in the past, they will do it again and again and again. Finland and Sweden are trying their best to join NATO, and they are wise in doing so. Every European country that is anywhere in the proximity of Russia should join NATO to make sure that they are not invaded and they are not exterminated by the Russian terrorist regime. And indeed, extermination is not too much of a strong word, because during the Soviet Union, there was an attempted extermination of the Ukrainian people in the two Holodomors, perpetrated by the Soviets. And then we are asked, why is it that the Ukrainians don't like the Soviet Union? Why is it that the Ukrainians aren't proud of the Soviet history? Well, because the Soviets were possibly one of the worst countries that ever existed in human history. One of the most genocidal, one of the ones that had the least respect for human dignity and human rights. Perhaps that could be the reason. Perhaps the reason for the collapse of the Soviet Union is because nobody wanted to be part of the Soviet Union, except of course the Russians, who were the overlords of the whole Khanate, with lack of a better word. Perhaps those countries wanted to join NATO to defend themselves. And yet, we get shills and Russophiles who still claim that the way for betterment, thank you very much, and the way for peace is to stop supplying Ukraine with weapons. How do we ever stop a war? By underpowering the ones who are defending themselves, by underpowering the ones who are fighting for their life. Let's imagine for a second, two men fighting right here in front of us. One of them has started the fight. The other one is simply defending himself. And the first time that the one who's defending himself punches back, we jump in and say, no, 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 you can't do that. You need to try to solve the situation in a peaceful way. I mean, would that make any sense? No, it wouldn't. It would be stupid. Who would ever say that? People should either try to separate them immediately or call the police and try to sort it out. They should never side with the aggressor in such a situation. And yet, with some incredible mental gymnastics, some individuals claim that that is the way to solve the situation in Ukraine. Because apparently, the opinion of the Ukrainian people does not matter to them. Only the opinion of the Russian oligarchs and the Russian elites and the Russian terrorist president, who we all know for a long time to have committed some of the worst atrocities in human history. The war in Chechnya, the war in Georgia, the war in Syria, the war in Ukraine. How many more times is Putin going to be allowed to act as he pleases in exchange of nothing but empty promises for the Russian terrorist regime? How many more times must we step on the same rake that we have stepped on so many times in the past? No, my friends. We need to move forward. We need to know better. We need to learn with our mistakes so that we never repeat them again. And now, my friends, I'm going to let one of our supporters to speak, because we welcome new people speaking in our rallies, and that is what it's all about, to exchange information and to bring more to the table. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
Slava
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Thank you very much, Pavlo. It's really good to be here this evening, and though there aren't a lot of us, I know that one thing is the most important, and that is the purpose that we all bring, and the unity we all bring. And I've even put it on a t-shirt. This is why we're here tonight, because we're united for Ukraine. So let's hear it. United for Ukraine!
United for Ukraine! United for Ukraine! United for Ukraine! United for Ukraine! United for Ukraine! United for Ukraine! United for Ukraine! United for Ukraine!
Thank you. Now, one of the other things I want to begin with, and again, Pavlo talked about these propaganda things and these propaganda myths that come around. One of the ones that I remember hearing, and is still here today, is this idea that Ukraine isn't a proper country. It doesn't really exist. Well, actually, the evidence for Ukraine is all around us. If you actually go to Holland Park here in London, you'll see a statue of Volodymyr the Great, leader of Ukraine, Ukraina Rus. And in the 10th century, 988, Volodymyr the Great christened Ukraine. Kyiv then was a thriving trading city at the center of what is now Ukraine and what was then the Ukrainian state and nation. And we think, is that the only thing we'll know? If you actually look at the coins of that kingdom, the trident that we all see over there, the trident was on the coins back in 988. And then the people say, oh, well, what about Russia? What about Russia? Well, actually, it's a good question to ask. So 988, Moscow was only a swamp. So if we think about where that history comes from and goes back to, Ukrainian history goes back a long way, 988 and before. And there's all sorts of different aspects of this history, culture, identity that Russia wants to deny, that we need to shout out about. So one of the other things to say is that Ukrainian, well, it's just a dialect of Russian. No, it's not. Ukraine is a distinct language. To say Ukraine is a dialect of Russian is like saying that Spanish is the same as Italian. It's nonsense. And Ukraine has a great literary tradition. We go back to 1798. Ukrainian poet Ivan Podgorevsky wrote the first great epic of Ukraine, modern Ukrainian literature, Eneida, a superb piece of writing. And that extended back down into the 19th century. Poets like Shevchenko, Frankov, poets imprisoned and exiled because they wrote in the Ukrainian language. So we know that Ukraine has a distinct language, has a distinct culture, has a distinct identity. And it's important that we remember that, and that we remember these 4 words, that Ukraine is not Russia. Ukraine is not Russia.
Ukraine is not Russia! Ukraine is not Russia!
Ukraine is not Russia. Ukraine is not Russia. Ukraine is not Russia.
Never has been, never will
Ukraine
be.
is not Russia.
Never has been, never will
Ukraine
be.
is not Russia. Ukraine is not Russia.
Never has been, never will be.
Thank you. But we always know that what we've seen happening is that Russia continues to deny Ukraine exists. So they have three tactics in their propaganda. They deny, they lie, and they destroy. So even in the 19th century, one of the education ministers in Russia said there is no Ukraine, there never has been, and there never will be. So there's that denial, even though that Ukrainian history stretched back to medieval times. Then they try and lie about it, and they lie about it even to their own people. So at the moment, history textbooks in Russia are being rewritten. So there isn't Kievska Rus, Kievan Rus, it's just Rus, or ancient Rus, to deny that Kiev was the centre of Ukrainian civilization. And then if they fail at denial, if they fail at lies, then they destroy. And what we see now, day by day, night by night, constant attacks on Ukraine by Russian missiles, Iranian missiles, bombing cities, bombing historical places, killing civilians. And these are not the actions, as Pavlo said, of a civilized country, of a civilized state. These show what that placard says, that Russia is a terrorist state. 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 Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state. Russia is a
Thank you.
terrorist state.
So, another one of these lies that you hear from Russian propaganda and from Putin is that, well, Russia is simply trying to take back its historic lands. And what they're trying to do, and this amorphous idea of their historic lands, is to destroy Ukraine, is to turn Ukraine into a nation of serfs that will just do their bidding, grow wheat, so they can send that out and trade with the world and enrich themselves. What they want to do is wipe out over 100 years of European history and change the balance of power in Europe and create some kind of new Russia, this Ruski Mir they call it, of something that goes from the Black Sea to the Baltic, dominated by Russia. And this isn't just Putin, and people say to me, well, it's just Putin. If Putin goes, then we won't have a problem. That's simply not true. As we've heard already, these people have got form. It's Tsarist Russia, it's Soviet Russia, it's Putin's Russia. These are all the same forces that want to create this swathe of Europe that is Russia from the Baltic to the Black Sea. And the question then is, how do we do this? How do we stop Russia doing this? Is it back to diplomacy? Is it back to talking nicely to a country that won't do anything to talk? Ceding territory. I see these news letters in newspaper columns where you can actually hear these earnest hand-wringers with their spineless talk of saying, oh, maybe if we compromise, maybe if we cede some territory, everything will be okay. No, it won't. The only way to stop this war is to stop Russia. Stop Russia! Stop the war! Stop Russia! Stop the war! Talked about the Bucharest Accords and the importance of that, of countries guaranteeing the territorial integrity of Ukraine, guaranteeing Ukraine's borders, and they need to stick to that. It's really important that what they do is help Ukraine do that. So again, is it diplomacy? What diplomacy can happen? Well, I think the first thing that's most important is to get into the mindset of Vladimir Putin and how he thinks. And Vladimir Putin's an old Leninist. He learned his trade through Marxism, Leninism in the old Soviet days. And it brings to mind one of the things that Lenin said, is when you approach your enemy, probe with your bayonet. If you encounter steel, withdraw. If you encounter mush, press on. And that's what we need to remember. That if we sit there and think, how can we compromise? What do we do to cede territory? How do we keep Russia quiet? This is just the mush that they want. The only language that Russia understands is the language of force. The only response to what is happening in Ukraine today has to be a military response. And we're asking people to carry on with what they've done. Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised. As you promised. Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Thank you. So, Ukraine needs this steel to be effective because it's facing an enemy that's dug in. It's spent the last 6 months putting in defences to stop the Ukrainian army. And the Russian army will throw anything and everything at Ukrainian forces to hold on to their territory that they've stolen and that they illegally occupy. So Ukraine needs to have the right tools for the job. Ukraine needs tanks. Ukraine needs artillery. Ukraine needs infantry fighting vehicles to be an effective force in fighting the Russians. We need heavy weapons. Heavy weapons for Ukraine. Heavy weapons for Ukraine. Heavy weapons for Ukraine. Heavy weapons for Ukraine. Just weapons in the land, but in the air. Air cover is absolutely essential. Ukraine's Air Force needs to match the Russian Air Force. It needs to be able to tip the scales more to its advantage so they can press on, not just through the summer offensive, but through the winter and what we know is coming. So what we need is air power. What we need are fighter jets. Fighter jets for Ukraine!
Fighter jets for Ukraine.
Fighter jets for Ukraine! Fighter jets for Ukraine! Fighter jets for Ukraine!
Fighter jets for Ukraine.
Thank you. But Ukraine's enemy in Russia is adaptable, and what they're trying to constantly do is find new tactics to defeat Ukraine, to wear Ukraine down. And for a while, they've been using lots of missiles and drones, many of these cheap drones bought from Iran, instruments of destruction that are aimed at civilians. And these attacks are only going to escalate. They're now building large factories to manufacture these cheap drones in Russia and also in Belarus. And what we're going to see in the coming weeks and months, as the summer draws to a close, the weather gets wetter and colder, is more targeting of power, more targeting of water, infrastructure, and also more targeting of the heritage history of Ukraine. So what they will carry on doing is trying to destroy Ukrainian heritage, destroy Ukrainian culture, destroy Ukrainian infrastructure, just do everything they can to wipe Ukraine off the map. So what does Ukraine need to stop this happening is air defense. So let's hear the next one. Air defense for Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine! Air defense for Ukraine! Air defense for Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine!
Air defense
For Ukraine!
Air defense for Ukraine.
Thank you. So, one of the other things that we hear, and again, some of these things you hear in the newspapers, almost are people trying to stir up trouble, I don't know, but the Ukraine isn't grateful for the help that's been given. So I remember back to the early days of the invasion in February. I think it was about the end of the first week. I finally managed to get hold of my cousin in Ternopil to find he was thankfully safe. And we were talking about, first of all, his safety, thankful that he and his family were safe. He sent me photographs of him and his family in a bomb shelter underneath their flat. And then we turned to what they were seeing happening. and I could hear the emotion and the catch in his voice. And he said to me, Honor, God forbid that the Russians take Kyiv. And there was that palpable fear that things were going to go the wrong way, and this was going to be the start of the destruction of Ukraine. But thankfully the tide turned, and the tide turned, thank you! And the tide turned because of the help that Ukraine got. And we saw the benefits of the training that Ukrainian soldiers have had since 2014, and we were grateful for that. And the new tactics that the army were adopting that had been taught, and we were grateful for that. And I think the thing we were most grateful of were the javelins and NLAWs that we used to destroy those masses of Russian tanks and halt the advance. And for those things we'll be eternally grateful. But what we know is the war's not yet over. It's not a cliche to say this for Ukraine is a war for national survival. It's not a cliche to say that if Russia wins it will wipe Ukraine off the map. It will subjugate the Ukrainian people into slavery and turn them into modern day serfs. Ukraine is a modern nation, but Russia denies even now that it exists. So there is an urgency for Ukraine. There is an urgency to receive weapons. There is an urgency to receive that help, because it has to happen. Ukrainians today are paying the price in blood in this war, and they need these weapons, and they need to be able to adapt not just as quickly but faster than the Russians are doing to be effective. So it's not just saying arm Ukraine, but we need the Western powers to do this faster. Arm Ukraine, do it faster.
Arm Ukraine, do it faster.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that Pavlo talked about, which is trade. And trade is actually something that should be good. Trade is something that should be a win-win. And that by trading goods, trading services, we find ways of enriching each other's lives. But what we're seeing now is companies, and I'm going to pick on Unilever and just talk about them tonight, who still are in Russia and still continue to trade in and with Russia. And we hear all these weasel words from Unilever, where the boss of Unilever has said, well, I've heard what you're saying, and we're going to look with fresh eyes at what we're doing with our trade. Well, let's look at the facts. In 2022, Unilever increased its net profits by 91% in Russia. Unilever paid $330 million in taxes to the Russian government. So what I'm asking of you is let's make a difference ourselves. Go home and go into your cupboards. Look what you've got in your kitchens and your bathroom. Are you using dog soap? Throw it in the bin. Are you using Domestos?
Oh, it's gone.
Throw it in the bin.
Little squirrel was watching us.
Nor in your kitchen. Throw it in the bin. Are you eating Hellmann's mayonnaise, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Cornetto? Throw them all in the bin. Don't buy Unilever goods. Boycott Unilever. Because if you're buying these things, you're supporting a sponsor of war. You're supporting a country, a company that is paying taxes that are paying for Russia's army of looters, rapists and murderers who are trying to destroy Ukraine.
They also own Marmite. We used to say you love Marmite or you hate Marmite. But until they get out of Russia, you can only hate Marmite.
Thank you, Tom. So,
Said what I had to say. I don't just
the answer to all of this is I would ask you all, look in your cupboard, what's in there, throw the stuff in the bin. If it's still unopened, send it to Ukraine as humanitarian aid and let's do some good with it. But one of the most important things we should remember, and what we should be saying to everyone else, is no trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia!
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 No trade with Russia.
Especially with Ben and
No
Jerry's.
trade with
Started by a couple of
Russia.
Ben and Jerry's. They're by a pair of hippies.
Thank you.
Yeah, they were started by a pair of hippies.
And what we also see happening in
hippies.
Ukraine.
Yeah, Ben and Jerry's, so they used to be hippies. I don't get it.
About the way
I'll show
that
you later.
Russians
Oh, they used to
and
be
Russians behave in
Yeah, they were
occupied
hippies.
Ukraine.
And now they
And
sold
in
the
the
company
occupied
out to a
territories
good
of
union. They
Ukraine,
were
there's
doing
been a
things. Yeah, they call
huge
themselves
influx
hippies, and now they're
of
trying to
carpetbaggers and shadowy businessmen
Yeah, I didn't know
who are
that.
stealing Ukrainian grain,
So they're
stealing
not
Ukrainian
hippies, they're
wealth,
hypocrites.
and shipping it abroad. And this
Hypocrites.
theft is part of that kleptocratic Russia
Hypocrites.
and people who are coming to Ukraine, taking advantage of Ukraine's misery to enrich themselves through their theft. And as they trade in this stolen grain and these stolen goods, the money they get for these ill-gotten gains
Don't
goes through the
most
international
fat people
banking
like me.
system.
Don't buy.
And all that is happening is we're seeing day by
Don't buy
day
Bayonetta.
the assets and the wealth of these carpetbaggers and oligarchs and their companies
So I mean,
in
because
Ukraine.
I'm fat, I
And one answer is to stop that flow of money so we don't let Russia and its looters profit from their theft.
saying that I'm fat.
So we say to everyone, freeze Russian assets! Freeze Russian assets!
Off!
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 Freeze Russian assets!
Off! Off!
Thank you.
Off!
I think over the recent weeks we've seen lots of diplomatic activity. We've seen a summit in Saudi Arabia, and there's lots of talk of peace. What could happen? What could be a framework for peace for Ukraine? And Vladimir Putin has turned around and said, well, the talks there could form a framework
have
for
to
peace. We could use it
It's
to
not
find a
going
framework
Putin's
for
way.
peace.
That's why you have to
But,
negotiate.
and there's always a big but, another one of these Russian lies that we need to be careful of and always read the small print. He says that Ukraine needs to accept these new realities on the ground. And these new realities mean that Ukraine has to accept that Russia is beginning to dismember Ukraine, and this is just the first bite. We also hear other people talking about peace. And President Erdogan said once, bad peace is better than war. Actually, that's not true. A bad peace is a guarantee of the next war. A guarantee that the war will be bequeathed to the children and grandchildren in Ukraine. And it won't stop there. That war will carry on. It won't just be in Ukraine. It will be in the whole of Europe as Russia finds breathing space to re-equip, to rearm, to make its army bigger. Because next time they won't make the same mistakes as they've made in this time in Ukraine. They'll have an even bigger army, but it'll be the same kind of looters, rapists and murderers who'll start by finally destroying Ukraine and then move into these other historic lands that they keep on talking about. The Baltic states, more of Finland, Poland and all the other areas of Europe that they think are theirs. So, what form should this peace take? So there's an interesting article last year in The Economist that was talking about thinking on the next steps should happen in Ukraine, and saying there were two parts. There were the peace part and the justice part. And the peace thinkers were saying we should do everything we can to get peace in Ukraine. But we know what that anything we can do to get peace in Ukraine. And there were people who were saying we need justice for Ukraine. And that justice has to be holding people to account, holding Putin and the Russian regime to account. Because how can we have peace when a government is left in place that has created this chaos in Ukraine, that has displaced nearly 10 million people who were uprooted from their own home, that has destroyed infrastructure right across the length and breadth of Ukraine. So it's not just about peace, it's about justice. And there can't be peace without justice. No peace without justice.
No peace without justice.
No peace without justice.
No peace without justice.
No peace. We've all heard the phrase, being in it for the long haul. And I know there are some people like Alison here who've known this is coming and been standing in places like this since 2014, since Russia first invaded Ukraine. So come on, quick round of applause to Alison. Well done. And well done for sticking with it and sticking with Ukraine. And as Pavlo said, what Putin is banking on is weariness, that people are getting tired, that they won't want to stand in the rain and the weather like we had a few weeks ago, and they're waiting for the cold and the wet to come in the autumn, and saying, well, all we need to do is wait this out. Will wither, the will weaken, and the support will end. But what energises me is that every time I come here, I see people who are in it for the long haul, and I see new faces, new people, new friends who are committed to stay together for Ukraine. So what I want to say to you and what we want to say to our leaders, stay together with Ukraine. 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 So, final words now. I'm going to talk about that phrase that Vladimir Putin's used again about new realities. And Putin tries to tell us there are new realities in the world, and Ukraine has to face those new realities on the ground. Well, actually, there are new realities for Vladimir Putin. We saw in March last year when Putin was saying, I want to normalise relations with our neighbours. And they said no. And that was a big surprise to him, because he thought the Western powers would just fold, would just give in and try and carry on with business as usual. So that was a new reality for him, that no. And we saw Finland and Sweden say, our border with Russia is not safe. We need to be in NATO. We need to have a safe border and protect our people. And despite Putin's bluster, Finland and Sweden didn't succumb. And it surprised him again. And there's another new reality for him. And the final one is we see all around us people like you, our communities and nations that are supporting Ukraine. And these are the new realities that we should remember and we should hold out our hope for. There's a slogan that's used in Ukraine, Razom do Peremohy, together to victory. Razom do Peremohy, everybody! And what is important is that what we do to make that true and make that a reality is we stand together. We strengthen our new realities and we stay with Ukraine and stay with Ukraine for the long haul. Because all together we will win. 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 And use those words that we're all so proud of. Slava Ukraini! Slava Nacii! Ukraina! 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 Захисничами України утричі! Слава! 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 Thank you.
Thank you, Roman.
Thank you very much. Very impressive, very well-researched speech. Now, before we go to our musical break, we will just let Garrett say a few words.
Hi everybody, Slava Ukraini! I hope you join with me in thinking that Roman Basinski did a damn good job there for speaking to us. I thought it was very fresh, very well researched, and I congratulate you, Roman. I'm particularly pleased because, like me, he comes up from Southampton, and we're both enthusiastic about this. We're also members of the Southampton Ukrainian Support Group, which is about a couple of hundred strong, I suppose, which has built up over a couple of years. It started by a couple called Sam and Mel, and now we meet every Tuesday during what they call term time. So there's a very vibrant Southampton community. Now Roman does a lot for the community, and for instance, he's been a prime mover in getting Ukrainians to go on walking tours in Dorset and Hampshire, and provides a lot of pleasure from that point of view. So once again, well done Roman. Go there.
Thank you, sir. Dear friends, we're going to have a musical break in a minute. So, thank you for standing with us today. Just to remind for those who joined this rally, we're here every Wednesday, 6 to 8, every Saturday, 4 to 6, Sunday, 3 to 5. There are a number of events. There is information and news shared on the social media. So please stay with Ukraine until our victory. We're planning the event outside the St. Volodymyr Monument on 24th of August, which is Ukrainian Independence Day. It's going to be at 6 p.m. start. So for those who are able to join in, please come and join us on the 24th of August. I think it's going to be Thursday.
Thursday, yes.
That's
Yes,
going to be
Thursday.
Thursday. So for those who are able to join us for the rally outside the St. Vladimir and Holland Park, please join us for 6 p.m. on Thursday, 24th of August. Thank you very much. We're going to have a musical break now, so stay with us, stay with Ukraine. All together until victory! Just very action music about the defense and our sky. Unfortunately, what's happening in Ukraine is far from being perfect, and our skies are even is better comparing to what's happened a year ago, but our skies, we cannot say for sure they are safe, they ain't. And every day's news showing that our air defense is still got holes that need to be solved. There's still got to be improved, and it's not enough what is currently in Ukraine, unfortunately. There are airstrikes over the peaceful Ukrainian cities. There are many strikes, and unfortunately people are dying, people are suffering because of the more and more airstrike launched by the terrorist Russia. The recent news from Ukraine didn't come up likely. There wasn't good news on there. Unfortunately, every day new raids, new airstrikes. And I'm saying that because 2 days ago we all heard about the Sicily Wall, which is far away from the front line. Sicily Wall was targeted. There are many people here in UK from the west, from east of Ukraine, but Sicily Wall, which everyone saw, it's a safe haven, has been targeted. As also as many other cities in the same day. There's been launched more than 70 rockets recently over the last just few days across the peaceful cities, and unfortunately there are casualties. In Lvov there were, if I can call it luck, but there was no death, but there were injured people. And what's been hit in Lvov was the nursery home, 8 meters deep, 8 meters across hole, because of the one missile that completely destroyed the nursery home. Luckily it happened early in the morning and no kids were present. If that would happen 2 hours later, imagine what could have happened. It's unimaginable. It's really unimaginable. What it says is Ukraine still needs your support. Ukraine needs the air defense. And the air defense is only the way is to improve it and continue to send more to defend Ukrainian sky, to defend Ukrainian territory. Air defense for Ukraine!
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 The famous Chinese, well, it's not Chinese, it's actually the, I'm gonna cite it, the
Far Eastern.
Sun Tzu, who wrote the book saying The Art of War, which is it's been cited by many military leaders throughout the centuries, and whose knowledge and books been taken into account. He is cited that one should always overestimate the enemy and underestimate oneself. What means Ukraine is not holding illusions. Ukraine is fighting against the far larger and stronger army that in numbers exceeding Ukrainian brave soldiers. But these numbers in the heavy armor, the numbers in the personnel, in the soldiers they're sending, it's nothing if we all stay united, and it's nothing if we are to continue to back our brave soldiers at the front line. And this is our priority, to continue support to Ukraine, our soldiers, to continue to help in every possible way towards this victory. And this is our prime duty, because they representing so much more than simply the victory in Ukraine. They representing the stability in Europe. They're representing future of the Europe. They're representing the shape of the future Europe. There is way more on the table just simply Ukraine. The agenda of the terrorist Russia is one, is to exhaust the Ukrainian forces and its partners by prolonging this war as long as possible, because they haven't got the date in their agenda. Their agenda is to exhaust the Ukrainian forces and for Ukraine to give up the fight. Their aim is to destroy, if needed, Ukraine and our friends. But the aim is to exhaust Ukraine until Ukraine will not be able to continue this war any longer. Our duty is to provide the support as long as possible until our victory, to provide this support in the numbers, quantities and quality necessary to be able to win this war. Because only victory, as has been cited, will bring the peace and will restore what we all aiming for, will restore our borders, will restore the future of Ukraine, will be able to give that future to Ukrainian children. The children that are dying every day in Ukraine because of the terrorist Russians and the war started by the terrorist Russian regime. Children, few days ago, young children under the age of 3 died. Many young people are dying in Ukraine. People looking shelter from the war zone towards the western Ukraine, and yet Russians is targeting those cities, aiming towards the critical infrastructure, aiming towards the airport, aiming towards the power plants. It seems to be we all forgot about what happened last winter, when Ukrainian energy grid and infrastructure was cut in half and causing blackouts. Yet Ukraine was united and strong back then, and united and strong now. Ukrainians were singing and shouting during the blackouts that they can live without electricity. but without Russia they can live, and they were willing to accept the blackouts. They were willing to accept the hardship only to win this war and bring the peace back to Ukrainian land. So it's even more important to help Ukraine, to provide Ukraine with what needed to bring the peace sooner, to bring the peace now. Don't let Russia to make this war going on for years, because this is what they will do if we not continue to support Ukraine. If we show the signs of weakness, if our faith in Ukraine will be weakened, then Russia will use any sign of weakness for their advantage. And they've been doing so. Any hesitation, they used it in the past to bring more war onto the other territories. Do not get fooled by the Russian propaganda. Again, they see they getting weaker. They see the sanctions are working without them admitting them. Paul mentioned about ruble cost 100. There's many memes going around the internet about the ruble cost 100. But do not underestimate, and we not underestimate. We know who we're facing. There is no illusion. We just need to make sure that Ukraine support continues and even more accelerates and getting stronger with every day. We need to show as never now the sign of unity across entire continent for Ukraine. That now I mentioned they represent way more than just a simply one country or one land. Ukraine represents Europe, peace, future. Ukraine is showing the democracy as it should be. Ukraine, it's just more than one word or one country. Stand with Ukraine, support Ukraine. Stand with Ukraine.
Stand with Ukraine!
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 Stop Russia. Stop the war.
Stop Russia! Stop the war!
Stop Russia. Stop the war.
Stop Russia! Stop the war!
Stop Russia. Stop the war.
Stop Russia! Stop the war!
And I'm talking to Ukrainians now. I will address that. Pan Roman is British-born Ukrainians. He's Ukrainian. Will probably put many Ukrainians ashamed. His knowledge about Ukraine is for many to still to learn and understand. I mentioned it, the person was born in UK, but he managed to plant the seed of what's been Ukrainian inside his heart, and he's managed to deliver this, I'm sure, to his friends and family, and he now today show all the passion in his speech about Ukraine. And he explained very detailed why we need to continue to stand and support Ukraine. Because only together we're going to win this war. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі! Слава! 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 I want you to have a minute of silence now to bow your head towards all the defenders of Ukraine who lost their lives. And the numbers are shocking and is yet to come. Unfortunately, they lost their lives. That's the ultimate price they paid for what we now want to see, the freedom and peace. And they lost their lives for what they truly believed. They believed in Ukraine. Minute of silence, please. Thank you. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі! Слава! 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 Ukraine does not need sympathy. Ukraine needs your support. And Ukraine needs your help now. Ukraine is asking for help because it's everything on the table for Ukraine now. Help Ukraine now!
Help Ukraine now!
Help Ukraine now!
Help Ukraine!
Now!
Help Ukraine now!
Help Ukraine now!
Help Ukraine now!
After this war, and I'm sure this war will end with Ukrainian victory, we're going to see the new generation of Ukrainians. The Ukrainians that finally will break away from the Russian control. The Ukrainians that will remember and will pass on to their children, and them hopefully will pass on to their children what the terrorist Russia did to them. Remember, it's not Ukraine who started this war. It's not Europe who started this war. It's not NATO who started this war. The war started by Russian terrorist federation. The war started not on 24th February 2022. The war started way before, 10 years ago, when the Russia fake election in Crimea, when the Russia annexed eastern of Ukraine. Yet everyone kept quiet back then. Similar scenario in Russia was expected and did in the past to the other countries. Did not happen overnight. It's been years now since Russia been planning, invading and taking more and more and more of Ukrainian territories. And they will not stop, and they wouldn't have stopped. They were stopped by Ukrainians there where they are now. And I'm sure Ukrainians will push them back to where they came from and beyond. Continue your support. This is our duty now, our aim. It's everything on the table for Ukraine. And it's a lot for Europe. The Russia is terrorizing, threatening, killing, murdering, torturing Ukrainian civilian, children, women, military, keeping the prisoners of war in inhumane conditions, forcing them to do the terrible things. They disregarding any laws of war, any laws of the human coexistence. They completely disregarded everything in order to achieve their aim. Again, I'm going to mention it, there is no date for their agenda. And they preparing to continue this for years if necessary. That's why it's important for us to stand together, to provide Ukraine with what Ukraine is asking, in the numbers, in the quality and quantity needed to be able to bring the victory, not in years to come, but sooner. To bring the victory now, to bring it today if necessary. And there is involved power. All they need is just political will and economical will to make this happen. Only together, only united, this is possible to achieve. Stand with Ukraine!
Stand with Ukraine!
Stand with Ukraine! Stand with Ukraine!
Stand with Ukraine!
I'm just gonna tell a few things about the Russian propaganda. I'm sick and tiring to hear what's happening down there, what they're saying. Unfortunately, it's impossible just to simply switch off the sources of information that coming across. But imagine, they propagandists keep saying, even now, under all the sanctions, under all the hatred they're receiving, after all they've done, they still stating that the Ukraine need to give up its territory, that Ukraine need to push the capital Kiev to the Lvov and give the territory to the Russians, that Ukraine will not succeed, that Ukraine is doomed. They keep opening the monuments to the Stalin, who terrorized the world, who terrorized the post-Soviet countries, who killed tens, if hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and millions lost their life during his time in power, and they still yet so, I don't know, I'm like a word, but they still putting monuments and then calling off the priest to say the prayer in front of the monument to the Stalin who killed the millions of people during his time. This is absolutely ridiculous. I have no words to describe how possible and what these people are thinking, if they're thinking at all. Because the logical people who think at least with one cell of their brain would never do that and accept this information. Yet they had about over 100 people came for the opening of the monument recently. 100 idiots. Sorry for my words. We fighting strong enemy, but we fighting zombie land. The zombie land who got no logical thinking at all. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі! Слава! 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 Thomas, sorry Thomas. I was about to say Tom, but there's another Tom. So I promised 5 minutes to Thomas, so he will come and say his passionate speech as always he does. So, but Thomas, 5 minutes, because we will be out of time. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini!
So, what I wanted to talk about today is about the war crimes that Russia are committing. So, Ukraine records these war crimes, and there have been at least 100,000 of them. So these include terrorism, attacks on civilians, unlawful airstrikes, attacks against civilian objects, threats of violence, inhumane treatment of POWs, execution-style killings of men and women, torture of people held in detention, rape of Ukrainian women and girls, forcible deportation of Ukrainian citizens to Russia, including thousands of children. So the response to this, you know, I don't think it's been good enough. We've heard some good words. For example, Secretary of State for the United States, Antony Blinken, said, "These acts are not random or spontaneous. They are part of Kremlin's widespread and systematic attack against Ukraine's civilian population." So why isn't there more of a response? And we usually get, they're worried about escalation. But what I say is worrying about escalation is a false choice. Let's think about that for a second. Escalation is more likely the longer the war goes on, and it's been demonstrated every day. We just have to look at this week, the countless amounts of strikes. It's unfathomable, it really is. Putin will keep escalating because he must, for as long as he can. The only way to end escalation is for Ukraine to win. So why drag it out? Yes to F-16s. Yes to long-range missiles. Yes to more air defences. Yes to more shells and to more ammunition. Yes to helping to train Ukrainian soldiers. Yes to help demining Ukraine. No to slow walking these things. No to feet dragging. We shouldn't be afraid of Russia. Those that are afraid cannot think clearly. So they can't really have a plan. So there's no time to be afraid. So don't be afraid of Russia.
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 Finally, Britain and her allies need a clear policy and an end goal. We cannot influence events in Russia. We don't want to. But we can defeat the Kremlin's war of aggression against Ukraine. We can influence it by ensuring that Ukraine's successful fight for national survival, and we can help Ukraine fully restore its sovereignty. So, final chant, stand with Ukraine.
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 Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!
Ukraina.
Понад усе!
Ukraina.
Понад усе!
Ukraina.
Понад
I
усе!
believe it's time for that lovely national anthem, and whenever I hear it, because in 2013-14 I stood on my dam and I thought, this is the song of the resistance. So whenever I hear the national anthem of Ukraine, it gives me goosebumps. So looking forward to hearing it again.
Thank you very much, Tom. We will hear the national anthem shortly. We got just a few more minutes left. What I would like to say today is few of our supporters and Stand With Ukraine volunteers having their birthday today. So I would like you all to say the happy birthday to Aya, who's been standing with us all this time and supporting Ukraine and supporting our good cause. And another birthday today celebrating Natalia Ravlyuk, whose effort for all those years has been undervalued, but she's been acting as a glue and the front man, if it's applicable to the women. But why women? She stood together and organized all these rallies, all the events, all the protests for many, many years, and continue to do so, whether she's present or not, at the backstage most of the time, but she's been incredible. And she representing all this, what's happening around London now. Because nothing happening without her influence. So, happy birthday to Aya, and a big happy birthday to Natalia Ravlyuk. I'm terrible singing. Dear Natalia, yeah.
Z dniem narodzenia Tebe, z dniem narodzenia Maja, z dniem narodzenia Tebe. Nasza Aja najżyje, mnoha lita najmaje, mnoha lita, mnoha lita, i mnoha lita, i mnoha lita, mnoha lita.
Thank you very much. Again, happy big welcome birthday to Aya and Natalia Ravlyuk. Thank you for helping out. You've been great. Mazel tov! It's a celebration for Aya and Natalia today, and we wish them all the best. We wish all of us victory, and we wish good health, strong will to see this victory to come soon and to be able to bring it to all of us. And we will, because victory is not in the years to come. The Ukraine victory will come soon. Stay with Ukraine!
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 Don't forget, we're here to remind the world who started this war and who Russians are. Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Again, that's not 100% of Russians applicable this, but majority of Russia did nothing and continue to do nothing to stop their own corrupt government, to stop their political elite, the clan of few who opened this war, continue this war, who feed in this war and killing Ukrainians.
Russian borders, go home!
Only by boycotting Russia, by having total embargo on Russia, as it was mentioned today, by stop buying from Russia and companies who taking profit over the moral duties, who still trading in Russia and paying taxes in Russia, feeding their economy, they as much guilty as those directly with arms in Ukraine, killing Ukrainians. Total embargo on Russia!
Total embargo on Russia!
Total embargo on Russia!
Total embargo on Russia!
Stop trade with 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 Russia!
Thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, it's about the time, and this rally is coming to the end. Just to remind those who join us today, we're here every Wednesday 6 to 8, Saturday 4 to 6, Sunday 3 to 5. On 24th of August, outside the St. Vladimir Monument at Holland Park, there will be another rally to celebrate Ukrainian independence, which will be followed by the concert in the Ukrainian Domivka at 154 Holland Park. You will be able to buy the tickets to see the concert on the door, or you can buy them in advance. Every money raised will go towards the Ukraine, towards the good cause. For those who are able to come and join us 6 o'clock outside the St. Vladimir, it's going to be Thursday, 24th of August. Please do bring your friends, bring your families. If you can still come and see here Wednesday, day before, Saturday, Sunday to follow. Stand with Ukraine!
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 Thank you very much. We're going to have national anthem now.
І слава, і воля, ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запанує і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці, душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Дякую!
Thank you. Дякую. Дякую всім вам.